I never expected that a routine shoulder surgery would completely change my life, but that's exactly what happened. For years, my world was a carefully constructed fortress of habit and solitude. It was safe, it was predictable, and it was, if I'm being honest with myself, profoundly lonely. Then a torn rotator cuff and a clumsy fall on some ice forced me to open the gate, and the first person to walk through it was Caleb. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was a 32-year-old writer who made a living stringing words together from the quiet comfort of my second-floor apartment. My days had a rhythm that rarely varied. Coffee, keyboard, a walk in the late afternoon, and the low hum of the city as my constant companion. I didn't have many friends in town. Most of my connections were digital, scattered across the country like seeds thrown to the wind. My apartment was my world, a place where everything was exactly as I left it. The building itself was old, with the kind of character that landlords like to call vintage charm, which really just meant the walls were thin and the plumbing had a personality. I could hear my neighbors' lives in muted tones, the muffled sound of a television, the occasional clatter of a dropped pan, the soft footfalls in the hallway. And for the past year, the most prominent sound from the apartment next to mine, 12B, was Caleb. Caleb was a presence. He was a firefighter, and he had the build for it: broad shoulders, strong arms, and a kind of easy, grounded confidence that seemed to radiate from him. I'd see him in the hallway or by the mailboxes, usually in a simple gray t-shirt that did little to hide the solid muscle beneath. He always offered a friendly, slightly lopsided smile and a "hey, man." But we never went much further than that. He was, in my mind, a resident of a completely different planet. He was sunshine and sirens and physical courage. I was quiet rooms and deadlines and the safe world of fiction. I cataloged everything about him from a distance, the way a naturalist observes a rare and beautiful bird he knows he can never touch. The way he carried his groceries in one trip, his biceps straining. The low, rumbling sound of his voice when he was on the phone, a comforting baritone that seeped through the drywall. Sometimes, late at night when he was off shift, I'd hear the gentle, surprisingly melodic notes of an acoustic guitar. It was a detail so incongruous with the hypermasculine image I had built of him that it made my chest ache with a strange, indefinable longing. He was handsome, of course. Objectively, undeniably handsome. But more than that, he seemed kind. I once saw him spend 10 minutes helping our elderly downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Gable, carry her shopping up the stairs, refusing to let her take even a single bag. He laughed with her, a genuine, warm sound that echoed in the stairwell. I watched from the crack in my doorway, feeling like a spy, my heart doing a foolish little flip. I told myself it was just admiration for a good deed. I was lying, of course. I knew I was lying. In my carefully constructed narrative, Caleb was the friendly, impossibly attractive, and almost certainly straight neighbor. He was a fixed point in my daily orbit, a pleasant but unattainable feature of my landscape. I was content with this arrangement, or at least, I told myself I was. It was easier to admire from afar, to keep my feelings tucked away in the same neat, orderly fashion as the books on my shelves. It prevented the messiness of hope, the terrifying possibility of rejection. And so, for a year, that's how it was. We were just two ships passing in the narrow hallway of our apartment building, offering polite nods before retreating back into our separate oceans. Then came the ice storm in February, and a single, clumsy step off a curb that sent a lightning bolt of pure, unadulterated pain through my right shoulder. The diagnosis was a full tear of the rotator cuff. The solution was surgery. The doctor was clinical and efficient. He talked about arthroscopic procedures and recovery timelines, about physical therapy and the importance of keeping the arm immobilized in a sling for several weeks. What he didn't talk about was how a person who lives alone is supposed to manage the simple, humbling tasks of daily life with only one functional arm. My family lived 1,000 miles away. My few local acquaintances were more colleagues than friends, not the kind of people you could ask to help you put on a shirt or open a jar of pasta sauce. A wave of quiet panic began to build in me as the surgery date approached. I'd stocked my freezer with microwavable meals and bought slip-on shoes. I'd arranged everything in my apartment to be accessible with my left hand. I thought I had it all figured out, convinced I could weather this storm alone, just as I weathered everything else. My first day back from the hospital was a rude awakening. The nerve block from the surgery wore off, and a deep, throbbing ache settled into my shoulder, a constant, grim reminder of my body's betrayal. The cumbersome foam and Velcro sling held my arm hostage against my chest, rendering it completely useless. I tried to open a bottle of water and failed. I tried to pull a container of soup from the fridge and nearly dropped it. By evening, I was exhausted, in pain, and staring at a can of chili I had no possible way of opening. I sat on my sofa, the useless can on the coffee table in front of me, and felt a profound sense of defeat. It was a stupid, insignificant thing, a can of chili, but it felt like the final brick in a wall of helplessness that was closing in around me. And in that moment of quiet despair, I thought of Caleb. I thought of his strong hands, his easy smile, his kindness to Mrs. Gable. The thought of asking him for help was mortifying. It was an admission of weakness, a breach of the unspoken code of neighborly distance we had maintained for a year. But the hunger and the pain were a powerful combination. I took a deep breath, the air shuddering in my lungs. I pushed myself up from the sofa and walked to my front door, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I stood there for a full minute, my hand hovering over the doorknob, wrestling with my pride. Then, I opened the door, walked the 4 steps across the hall to apartment 12B, and knocked. The sound was too loud in the quiet hallway. The door opened almost immediately. Caleb stood there, wearing a pair of faded jeans and another one of his signature gray t-shirts. His hair was damp, like he'd just gotten out of the shower, and he smelled faintly of soap and something clean and woodsy. He looked surprised to see me. "Hey, Lucas. Everything okay?" His brow furrowed with concern as he took in my appearance, the sling, the pale, pained look on my face. My carefully rehearsed speech evaporated from my mind. All I could manage was a weak, hi. Yeah, I have a really weird and embarrassing favor to ask." He leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, instantly putting me at ease. "Nothing's embarrassing, man. What's up?" I held up the can of chili I'd brought with me, feeling my cheeks flush with heat. I can't open this," I mumbled, feeling like an idiot. "I had surgery on my shoulder, and my right arm as well. It's out of commission for a while." Caleb didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. His expression softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. "Oh man, that's rough." Of course, he took the can from my hand, his fingers brushing against mine for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, a fleeting, incidental contact, but a jolt went through me all the same. "Come on in," he said, stepping back to let me into his apartment. "I'll open it. Do you need anything else?" His apartment was the mirror image of mine, but it felt completely different. Where mine was spare and meticulously ordered, his was warm and lived in. A well-worn leather armchair sat in the corner, a plaid blanket thrown over its arm. His acoustic guitar was propped against the wall next to a stack of books. The air smelled like coffee and that clean, woodsy scent that was just him. It felt like a home. He opened the chili with a quick, effortless twist of his wrist. He then proceeded to not just open it, but to dump it into a bowl, microwave it, and hand it to me with a spoon. "Here," he said. "You should have just knocked sooner. Seriously, I'm off for the next 2 days. If you need anything, and I mean anything at all, just bang on the wall." "Okay." I stood there in his kitchen, holding a warm bowl of chili, completely overwhelmed by his simple, unconditional kindness. The barrier I had so carefully constructed around myself was beginning to crumble. "Thank you, Caleb. Really, I thank you." "Don't mention it," he said, his smile finally appearing. "It was even better up close. That's what neighbors are for, right? That's what neighbors are for." The phrase echoed in my head as I walked back to my apartment. I had knocked on his door expecting a simple favor, a mechanical transaction. Instead, I had been met with a warmth and generosity that left me feeling unsteady, my carefully managed solitude suddenly feeling a lot more like loneliness. The fortress gate hadn't just been opened. It felt like it had been gently, kindly, pushed clean off its hinges. The next 2 days unfolded in a way I never could have anticipated. Caleb was true to his word. He checked on me in the morning, bringing over a cup of coffee he'd brewed, already doctored with the milk and sugar I told him I liked. He insisted on running to the store for me, returning with not just the things on my list, but also a container of soup from a local deli he said was the best in the city. He helped me with infuriatingly simple tasks, like tying my shoes or getting a new trash bag into the bin. Each interaction was a delicate dance of proximity and care. He was always careful, always respectful of my space, yet his presence filled my quiet apartment, changing its very atmosphere. The silence I was so accustomed to was now punctuated by his easy laughter and the low rumble of his voice. My home, which had always been a sanctuary of solitude, began to feel less empty, less silent. It felt occupied, and I discovered, to my surprise, that I didn't mind it at all. On the second evening, he knocked on my door around dinner time. "I made way too much pasta," he announced, holding up a large container. "Figured you might be getting tired of chili." He came in, and we ate together, sitting at my small dining table. The awkwardness I had feared never materialized. Instead, the conversation flowed easily, as if we'd been doing this for years. This was when I started to see the man behind the facade I'd created. He talked about his job, but not in the way I expected. He didn't share stories of heroic rescues or daring feats. He talked about the quiet moments, the false alarms, the long, boring hours at the station, the challenge of trying to calm someone down on what was likely the worst day of their life. He spoke of the emotional toll it took, the things you couldn't unsee. There was a thoughtfulness in his words, a deep well of empathy I hadn't anticipated. Then he asked about my writing. I was usually guarded about my work, but with him, the words came easily. I told him about the novel I was struggling with, the characters who felt more real to me than most people. He listened intently, his chin resting on his hand, his gaze focused and unwavering. He didn't just hear me. He was actually listening. He asked smart questions, questions that showed he understood the creative struggle. "It's kind of like building something, I guess," he said, contemplating. "You have all the pieces, but you have to figure out how they fit together to make something that stands up on its own." He then confessed that he liked to do woodworking in his spare time, small projects, refinishing old furniture. It was another piece of the puzzle, like the guitar, that didn't quite fit my original picture of him. He wasn't just a collection of muscles and a handsome face. He was a craftsman, a creator, a man with a rich and quiet inner world. Later that evening, as he was helping me adjust the complex assortment of pillows I needed to sleep upright on the sofa, his hand accidentally brushed against the back of my neck. It was the briefest of contacts, skin on skin, but it was electric. A current of heat shot through me, sharp and startling. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. His hand lingered for a second longer than necessary before he pulled it away. "Sorry," he said, his voice a little thicker than before. "It's fine," I managed to say, my own voice barely a whisper. Our eyes met for a moment, and the air between us suddenly felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. It was the first time the easy, platonic bubble of neighborly help felt like it might be about to pop. He cleared his throat and took a step back, breaking the spell. "Well, try to get some sleep. I'll check on you in the morning before my shift." He left, and I was alone again in the silence of my apartment. But this time the silence was different. It was filled with the echo of his presence and the lingering ghost of his touch on my skin. I replayed that tiny moment over and over in my mind, dissecting it, analyzing it, feeding a fragile, dangerous hope that I knew I should be starving. By the fourth day, a new kind of misery had set in. The pain in my shoulder was manageable with medication, but I was beginning to feel profoundly, unpleasantly human. Specifically, I felt grimy. I hadn't been able to properly shower, resorting to clumsy sponge baths that left me feeling only partially clean. And my hair was a disaster. It was flat, greasy, and had started to itch. It was a small thing, a vanity, but it made me feel disgusting, like my own body was a stranger to me. Caleb came over that afternoon after his shift, looking tired but still smiling. He took one look at me slumped on the sofa, scratching listlessly at my head with my good hand, and his smile faded into a look of concern. "You okay?" "Shoulder hurting." I let out a sigh of pure frustration. "No, it's not the shoulder. This is going to sound so stupid. I already told you, nothing's embarrassing," he said, sitting on the edge of the coffee table, facing me. "What is it?" "My hair," I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of self-pity. "I can't wash it. I feel like there's an oil slick on my head. I know it's a ridiculous thing to be upset about, but it's driving me crazy." He was quiet for a moment, just looking at me. I expected him to laugh or to offer some empty platitude. Instead, he said, with complete seriousness, "No, that's not stupid at all. I get it. Feeling clean is important." He paused, and I could see the gears turning in his head. Then he said, I could help you. I could wash it for you, if you want." The offer hung in the air between us, shimmering with unspoken implications. It was an act of profound intimacy, far beyond making coffee or opening a can. It meant trusting him, being vulnerable in a way I hadn't been with anyone in a very long time. My heart started hammering against my ribs. The part of me that was terrified of hope screamed at me to say no, to retreat back into my safe shell. But the part of me that was so tired of being alone, the part that craved simple human contact, whispered, "Yes, you would do that?" I asked, my voice small. "Of course," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." He led me into my own bathroom, which suddenly felt incredibly small and intensely personal. He had me sit on the closed toilet lid while he got everything ready. He tested the water temperature with his wrist, adjusted the shower head, and laid out a towel. He did it all with a practical, no-nonsense efficiency that was both reassuring and deeply touching. "Okay," he said, turning to me. "You'll probably have to take your shirt off so it doesn't get soaked." My breath hitched. My mind raced. But I just nodded, and with my one good hand, I awkwardly pulled my t-shirt over my head, feeling suddenly exposed under the harsh bathroom light, my pale torso and the bulky sling contrasting with his confident presence. He didn't stare. He just nodded and helped me move to a small plastic stool he'd placed in the tub. "All right, lean back," he said gently. I did, resting my head against the tiled wall as he directed the spray of warm water onto my hair. The sensation was immediate and glorious. I closed my eyes, letting out a soft sigh of relief. Then I felt his hands. They were strong and sure, but impossibly gentle. He worked the shampoo into my scalp, his fingers massaging away the tension and the grime, moving with a slow, deliberate care that was almost reverent. My world narrowed to the sound of the running water, the clean scent of the shampoo, and the feeling of his hands in my hair. Every defense I had ever built, every wall I had erected, dissolved in the warmth and the tenderness of that moment. I wasn't his neighbor, he was helping out of a sense of duty. I wasn't a project or a charity case. In that moment, I was just a man being cared for by another man, and it was the most profoundly intimate experience of my life. I was completely surrendered to it, to him. When he was done, he carefully rinsed out all the suds, his fingers combing through my hair one last time. "There," he whispered, his voice low and close to my ear. "All clean." He turned off the water, and the sudden silence was deafening. He wrapped a thick, soft towel around my head, blotting at the moisture, and then another one around my bare shoulders. My eyes were still closed. I didn't want the moment to end. "Okay, let's get you out of there," he said softly. He put his hands on my arms to help me stand up from the low stool. I was unsteady, my body pliant and relaxed from the warmth. As I rose to my feet, my movement combined with the slickness of the water caused the towel around my shoulders to slip. It fell in a heap around my ankles, leaving my upper body completely bare. And then, everything stopped. We were standing face to face in the small, steamy space, barely a foot apart. He was still wearing his t-shirt, now damp in patches, but I was exposed. His hands were still on my arms, his grip firm and steadying. His eyes, which had been full of gentle concern, now held something else entirely, something deeper, more intense. They flickered from my eyes, down to my chest, to my lips, and then back to my eyes. The air grew thick, charged with a voltage I could feel on my skin. The carefully maintained act, the pretense that this was just a favor, that we were just neighbors, fell away with the towel. It was gone. All that was left was the raw, unspoken truth between us. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could feel it through his hands. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only look at him, my whole being screaming with a terrifying, beautiful hope. He didn't rush to cover me. He just held my gaze, his own pupils dark and wide. In that silent, water-soaked moment, a year of polite nods and hallway smiles was obliterated, replaced by a connection so powerful it felt like a physical force. The moment stretched, suspended in the steam-filled air of my bathroom. His grip on my arms didn't loosen. His gaze didn't waver. It felt like an entire conversation was happening in the space between us, a conversation without words, full of questions and answers that were too fragile to be spoken aloud. The world outside that tiny room ceased to exist. There was only the drip of water from the faucet, the scent of shampoo, and the overwhelming presence of him. Then, slowly, as if moving through water, he released one of my arms. I thought he was going to step back, to break the spell, to pretend it never happened. My heart sank, but he didn't step back. He reached down and picked up the fallen towel. His movements were deliberate, almost agonizingly slow. He straightened up, and instead of just handing it to me, he gently, carefully, wrapped it back around my shoulders himself. His knuckles brushed against my collarbone, and the touch, as light as it was, sent a shiver through my entire body. "There," he said, his voice a low rasp. He finally broke eye contact, clearing his throat and taking a small step away. The connection was severed, but the energy lingered, a static charge left in the air. "You should, get dressed. Before you get cold." The spell was broken. The practical world came rushing back in, but everything was different now. The landscape had been permanently altered. The next 24 hours were excruciating. The easy camaraderie we had built was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. When he came by that evening to drop off a pizza he'd picked up, he barely came inside the door. He stood in the hallway, holding the box out to me, his eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. The friendly chatter was replaced by clipped, formal sentences. "Here's that pizza," he said. "Thanks, Caleb. How much do I owe you?" "Don't worry about it. It's fine." "Are you sure?" "I can." "I'm sure," he cut in, his tone final. "I've got to go. Got an early shift." And then he was gone, retreating back into his apartment before I could say another word. The warmth that had filled my apartment for days had vanished, leaving a cold, anxious void in its place. I spent that night and the entire next day in a state of agonizing internal debate. My mind was a courtroom, and the shower scene was the key piece of evidence. The prosecution argued that I had imagined it all, that I had projected my own desperate longing onto a simple act of kindness from a good-natured, straight man. The look in his eyes, a trick of the light, the lingering touch, an accident. His current awkwardness was proof of my transgression. I had made him uncomfortable, and now he was trying to distance himself, to re-establish the boundary I had so clearly fantasized about crossing. But then the defense would take the stand. It would replay the moment with perfect clarity, the way his pupils had dilated, the way his breath had hitched, the way time itself seemed to warp around us. No, that wasn't imagination. That was real. His awkwardness now wasn't a sign of rejection, but of mutual panic. He felt it too, and he was just as terrified as I was. He was retreating because he didn't know what to do next, not because he wanted to escape. Hope and fear waged a brutal war inside me. One moment, my chest would fill with a dizzying, soaring optimism. He felt it. He felt it too. The next, I would be crushed by a wave of shame and dread. I had ruined it. I had taken his profound kindness and twisted it into something it wasn't, and now I had lost the one real connection I had managed to make in this city. I replayed every interaction, every word, every glance, searching for clues, for confirmation of one reality over the other. I was driving myself insane. The quiet of my apartment, once a comfort, was now a torture chamber for my overactive thoughts. The silence was louder than ever before. By the second evening after the incident, I had resigned myself to the worst-case scenario. I had decided to accept that I'd misread everything. It was the safest conclusion, the one that would hurt the least in the long run. I would be polite, distant, and grateful, and slowly, hopefully, we could return to being just neighbors. The brief, beautiful interlude was over. It was a painful, bitter pill to swallow, but I forced it down. I was sitting on my sofa, staring blankly at the television, when there was a knock on the door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, completely different from his usual confident rap. My stomach twisted into a knot. I considered not answering, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. I got up, my legs feeling like lead, and opened the door. Caleb stood there. He wasn't smiling. He looked nervous. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his jeans, and he was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hey," I replied, my own voice tight. An agonizing silence stretched between us. The air in the hallway was thick with everything we hadn't said. Finally, he took a deep breath and lifted his head, his gaze finally meeting mine. His eyes were full of a raw, startling vulnerability. "Lucas," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Can we talk? I think I'm losing my mind." My heart stopped. He looked just as wrecked as I felt. I could only nod, stepping back to let him in. He walked into the middle of my living room and just stood there, his back to me, running a hand through his hair. The confident, self-assured man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed just as lost as I was. He turned around to face me, his expression earnest and strained. "Look," he started, "I am so sorry if I've been weird the last couple of days. I haven't known what to say." "It's okay," I said automatically, the pre-rehearsed line of retreat. "You don't have to say anything. I get it. I probably made things awkward." "No," he interrupted, taking a step closer. The intensity in his eyes was back, but this time it wasn't just desire, it was desperation. "No, you didn't make anything awkward." "I did. Lucas, what happened in the bathroom? It wasn't just you." The breath I was holding escaped in a shaky exhale. "It wasn't." He shook his head, a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips for a second. "God, no. The truth is, I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for months. Not as a neighbor, as something else. But I had no idea if you were, interested. And I didn't want to make things weird where we live." He let out a short, humorless laugh. Guess I failed at that part. My mind was reeling, trying to process his words. He'd been interested? For months? The entire narrative I had built, the one where I was the silent admirer of the unattainable man, was completely wrong. We had been two people standing on opposite sides of a door, both too afraid to knock. "When you needed help after your surgery," he continued, his voice softer now, "I saw it as a chance to get to know you without the pressure. And it was amazing, getting to talk to you. Hearing about your writing, it was better than I'd even imagined." He took another step closer. "We were only a few feet apart now. And when I was washing your hair, Lucas, all I could think about was how much I wanted to be close to you. And when that towel fell, I panicked. Because in that moment, I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't pretend I was just being a helpful neighbor." Every word he said dismantled another one of my fears, replacing it with a hope so bright it was almost painful. He wasn't rejecting me. He was confessing. It was my turn to be brave. "I thought I was imagining it," I whispered, the admission feeling like a weight lifting from my chest. "I thought I had taken your kindness and projected my own feelings onto it. I was so sure I had read everything wrong." "You didn't read anything wrong," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to gently cup my face. His touch was warm and steady. "You read it perfectly." He looked at me then, a clear question in his eyes, giving me a final chance to back away. I didn't. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. And then, he lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't like the movies. There was no swell of music. It was quiet and hesitant at first, a gentle exploration. But then it deepened, becoming something sure and confident and full of all the unspoken longing of the past year. It was a kiss that tasted of relief and recognition, a confirmation that the world I had been so afraid to hope for was real, and it was right here in my living room. In that moment, there were no more doubts, no more fears, only the simple, overwhelming truth of his lips on mine. The weeks that followed that kiss felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world saturated with color. The awkward tension was replaced by a comfortable, exciting intimacy. Caleb's presence in my apartment became a permanent fixture. His scent lingered on my pillows, his coffee mug sat next to mine on the counter, and the sound of his key in my door became a more welcome sound than the notification of a met deadline. We fell into a new rhythm together. He would come home from a long shift, tired and smelling of smoke, and I would have dinner waiting. He'd collapse onto the sofa and pull me down next to him, and I would listen as he talked about his day, feeling the tension slowly leave his shoulders under my touch. On his days off, we explored the city. He took me to his favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and I took him to my favorite quiet bookstores. We learned the topography of each other's lives, the histories and hopes and small, silly fears. I learned that his woodworking was more than a hobby. It was his meditation, a way to create order and beauty after a day spent witnessing chaos. He learned that my quietness wasn't aloofness, but a habit born of a lifetime of observation. He was the first person who didn't try to pull me out of my shell, but instead was content to simply climb inside and sit with me. The cautious, lonely man who had knocked on his neighbor's door for help opening a can of chili was slowly but surely disappearing, replaced by someone who was learning to not just accept help, but to welcome him. A few months later, after my shoulder had fully healed and the sling was a distant memory, we were in the shower together. The bathroom didn't feel small or awkward anymore. It felt like ours. As the warm water streamed over us, Caleb took the shampoo bottle, poured a small amount into his palm, and began to gently lather my hair. I leaned my head back against his chest, a wave of emotion washing over me. He wasn't just washing my hair. He was washing away the last remnants of my old life, of my solitude. I turned my head to look at him, and he was smiling that lopsided smile I had first admired from across a hallway. "What?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "Nothing," I said, my own smile spreading across my face. "Just thank you." "For washing your hair?" he chuckled. "For everything," I clarified. He understood. He leaned down and kissed me, a long, slow kiss full of warmth and promise, the scent of shampoo and the sound of running water, our own private symphony. I used to think that strength was about self-sufficiency, about building walls so high that nothing could ever hurt you. I believed that needing someone else was a form of weakness, an admission of failure. But I was wrong. My moment of greatest physical weakness, a time when I literally couldn't even care for myself, led me to the greatest emotional strength I have ever known. It turns out that true strength isn't about keeping people out. It's about having the courage to let the right person in. Sometimes, you have to let your own carefully constructed world fall apart a little, just so someone else can be there to help you build it back, better and brighter than it was before.